What is the most evil thing your company is doing? Story 1. Our hospital has a nasty habit of mislabeling bodies. Twice in a single month, a body ended up in the wrong place, toe-tagged as living patients, bodies misplaced, etc. But there was this one event that made the hospital crack down on it. A child under 3 years old passed away in the hospital. The parents were on vacation and out of town when it happened. The hospital sent the child's body via a funeral home driver to a parlor about 2 hours south. They got all the way to the funeral parlor to find out it was the wrong body. They brought the wrong dead child to the funeral home. The hospital flipped its crap. They tried to get the funeral home driver to come back up to the hospital with the mislabeled corpse and take the correct body back down. He refused, washing his hands of the major screw-up. The hospital wound up hiring an emergency private funeral home to rush down south and exchange the bodies. The hospital was somehow able to distract the parents for the 3 hours it took the situation to be resolved. All this happened without the knowledge of the family. A lot of people in my department know the story, but neither of the families found out. Before we continue, do us a quick favor. Smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. My wife's company just revised its sick leave policy. If you call in sick 3 days in a rolling year, you are put on disciplinary action. If you call in sick 6 times in any 12 months, you are fired. My wife works for a hospital, one that is forcing their employees to come in and take care of immunocompromised patients while sick and contagious. Story 3. I got second-degree burns on 10 to 15% of my body when a coworker wasn't using a machine properly and left me to find out his errors. Management didn't fire him. Management lied to upper management about the incident to protect themselves. Management also incorrectly filled out the WorkSafe forms to get away with what is mentioned above. The best thing though, I can even sue because Australia's workplace laws gloss over burn injuries that don't leave you charred black. I sliced part of my finger off at work, wrapped it in paper towels and napkins, and hauled it to my doctor, who was also the closest healthcare provider. The nurse casually asked me if it had happened at work, which I thought was a reasonable question since it was the middle of a weekday, and when I answered yes, she refused to treat me and escorted me out of the building. Being the grown-up that I am, I squeezed my injured finger and sprayed blood all over the wall on my way out because I pay you $300 a month for insurance, and screw you. I had to drive another 20 minutes to urgent care. When I finally got back to work, I got yelled at by the business owner for not lying about it happening at work and therefore screwing up their workers' comp and insurance rates. They were able to reattach the sliced-off part though, not even a scar, and today is my last day with that company. Story 4. The last company I worked for, Tiles. They are the largest retailer of natural stone tile in the US, and one of the largest for man-made tile as well. There are about 100 stores, probably 110 now, that do not carry a lot of product in stock. Instead, the product is stored in distribution centers and then trucked to the stores when customers order it. Last winter, there was a big snowstorm in Michigan. One of the regional managers sent out an email to the DC staff telling them that the snow would not be an excuse and that they needed to be in to work on time, no excuses. A father and son who both worked at the DC left their home around 3 a.m. because they knew the snow would slow them down. They died in a car crash on the way there. The company tried to avoid paying out on its life insurance. Fortunately, the widow sued them and won to the tune of multiple millions of dollars. I also heard that at the funeral for the father and son, the company had sent a wreath, and when the widow saw it, she flipped out and destroyed it. Later, at a managers' meeting where the company flies out all the store managers once a year, the regional manager and the CEO were heard saying that it was the workers' fault. I can't remember the exact quote I heard, but it was pretty much heartless. The company is also built on Chinese slave labor, but that's nothing new. Story 5. The family restaurant I used to work for had a free meal for the poor on Christmas Eve, and they had Santa and gifts for kids, which sounds very nice of them, but really, it was mainly just a scam. They would put little signs on all the tables and start taking donations in November. They would accept food and toys, but they always pushed people to donate cash. They claimed it was harder for them to get the things they really needed otherwise. The thing is, they didn't need or use the cash for the charity dinner. All food and toys were donated, and the workers were all unpaid. They scheduled their entire staff to work that day but wouldn't pay them. Yes, that's right. On the schedule, no pay. They never bought anything themselves. The owners pocketed all the money. I'm talking thousands of dollars. They also went shopping for donated gifts for presents for their grandkids and let their kids do the same. They pretty much always had gifts left over, but would get pissed if we told any customers that after the fact, because they were worried people would donate less next time. In the end, people still got fed, and kids still got presents. But when you see a family that you can tell is not very well off, donate $20, $30, or $50 because they think they are helping those less fortunate. And you know the cash is going straight to feeding the owner's gambling problem. It eats at your soul a bit. Story 6. When I worked at a popular chain store to put myself through college, my manager would pull me aside almost daily and try to force me to follow any and all black customers who came in to shop. I'm not kidding. These customers did nothing wrong to merit such suspicion, save for the dastardly crime of shopping while black. She would try to threaten me with the loss of my job or severely cut my hours back when I made it clear I would do no such thing. When I finally got sick of her threatening me because I wouldn't discriminate against black families that just came in to get groceries and household necessities, I called the district manager to inform him of her blatant racism, and he told me she was perfectly in line with what he told her to do, and that if I didn't start doing that, he'd fire me himself. I wound up quitting over that. Seriously, screw them. Story 7. I don't work there anymore, but I worked for a place that sold prescription savings plans to elderly people. They were pure evil. Our job was to try to get elderly people to cancel their insurance and switch to our plan, which was a very crappy plan that would end up costing them a lot more. And of course, once they switched and found out how crappy we were, it was very hard for an elderly person to get back on their regular insurance. I had elderly people calling me up in tears. I just couldn't handle it. I have never wanted to set a building on fire more than when I worked there. I quit after 2 weeks of working there. Story 8. We fly and house big executives from overseas. We pay for things like houses, horses, and college education for their children. Place government officials in fancy hotels with thousands of dollars in room service and official company business. Then we take all of those expenses and charge them to the customers. Didn't believe it at first until the higher-ups had a meeting with a government agency who they somehow convinced that all of this was okay because it's only pennies on the customer's bills, which is a blatant lie. Story 9. My dad worked for United Airlines until a few weeks after they declared bankruptcy, around 2005 or so. All their workers' retirement money were forced to be tied to the company's stock price. So, the top billionaires who ran the show pulled the bankruptcy card, watched the stock price plummet, and then laid everyone off and cut them a check before it had a chance to rise again. They laid off thousands and completely closed their bases at many top airports in some of the biggest U.S. cities. All very hush-hush and unexpected. My dad had $500,000 in retirement savings. They cut him a check for $2,500, and those jerks are still out there with every penny of their own money. Oh yeah, and all the bigwigs got millions in bonuses that same year. A significantly larger amount than their usual absurd bonus. Must have paid off the right people because they never got caught and never spent a day in jail. My dad is now 59 with no retirement and hasn't found a job making over $12 per hour that will take him since. Story 10. I worked as a recruiter for a recruiting company. I see the hiring process from the other side. I was always naive and thought the hiring process was strictly merit-based. Not so. We have one client company that basically said to us, give us anyone as long as they're not black. If they're Asian, or even Asian-looking, they don't have to have experience, we'll hire them. These are for engineer positions. And the people my company supplies are quality people with solid experience who just happen not to be Asian. My jaw drops every time someone says, I have a great candidate for this position, and the supervisor says, are they black? A huge part of getting a job is who you know. This company acts as that trustworthy intermediary, but it also acts as a tool for legal discrimination for HR departments. The client companies specify the age, gender, attractiveness, and race of who they want working for them. Story 11. I don't work here anymore, but I previously worked at a restaurant coffee bar that was trying to cut back on expenses, including the discounts that it gave its employees. The discounts could not be revoked without disciplinary action, so they found creative ways to get people in trouble. Once, a single mother was scheduled for a day she was promised off the day before, and was not informed or called. When she didn't show, her discounts were revoked, and her hours cut. Hours she needed to feed her child, by the way. Another time, an employee tried to call out sick. She was asked to come in anyway. She continued throwing up at work. The manager told her to suck it up and try not to puke on a customer. When she couldn't take it and went home after prolonged vomiting, her discounts and hours were slashed as well. Story 12. I don't work there now, but in college, the restaurant I worked at sold soup in $3 cups and $5 bowls. Cups were narrow and deep, and bowls were big and shallow, so they looked bigger when full, but they were both 8 ounces. The restaurant I worked at used to sell 80-cent 12-ounce cans or $1.50 32-ounce large cups. When someone ordered a large, we would fill the cup up with ice, open a 12-ounce can, and use it to fill up the cup, and then drink the last swallow. Story 13. I work in retail, which is stressful when you're understaffed. The store manager combined 3 departments into one manager, and he had a heart attack in our dairy cooler. Recently, we have been assigned more work areas than a human can possibly do without the help of drugs. Some people were getting an estimated 21 hours of freight in a night. One lady died yesterday from stress. Her blood sugar was going crazy from the stress. She stopped taking her meals and breaks, trying to get her work done, and she fell into a coma. Our store is covering both accidents. Blame it on the worker, of course. We had a meeting about asking for help if we were meeting our times, and that we have to take every break and meal. Oh, and no overtime. Story 14. I worked for the ALS Association. Where I lived, the executive director used the organization's credit card as her personal bank account, stole laptops, and rarely showed up for work, and when I reported it to the board, they quietly swept it all under the rug. I also worked for an organization that had a public inebriate program. Our manager told us $75,000 were missing from our general fund, but that they weren't going to investigate it, but that we should pray about it. I reported it to the local police department, who in turn handed it over to the prosecuting attorney. Both of these were nonprofits. I hate nonprofit organizations and have seen nothing but corruption. I worked for a nonprofit too, after being one of their volunteers. The organization was split into 2 big projects, and I found out that in one of them, the project manager was just hiring members of his family or his friends and assigning them bogus tasks with overpaid compensation. When I started to speak up about it, I suddenly found myself being targeted by random acts of sabotage, missing files, trashed headphones, a cousin of his spying on my work. I ended up quitting after 6 months since the only person I could trust had already quit for similar reasons. To be fair, the other half of the company was working in a very transparent way, but then when people look from the outside, they only see the bad things. I volunteered and worked in other nonprofit organizations after that and realized that my bad experience was an exception. Story 15. I used to work doing events with a popular international hotel chain in the UK, and they had no respect for staff. In the past, the deal was that we never got the length of breaks required by law. The organization of the events made real breaks difficult, but in exchange our shorter breaks would be paid and we got food provided. Then, after one Christmas, with everybody working crazy hours for the last month, missing Christmas Eve, Christmas Day and New Year's because of work, everybody noticed their paychecks were a little light. It turned out that in November they had decided to change the break policy so that we had to take full breaks with every shift and that we would no longer be paid for them. Except they forgot to tell us this at the busiest time of the year, so nobody was taking full breaks. If you tried, you'd only get grief from the management anyway, so everyone lost 30 minutes of pay per 6 hours of work. And when we were all on minimum wage and losing our holidays for that horrible place, it was a massive slap in the face. The day I quit, because I was starting a PhD, was a very good one. Story 16. I work for some truly reprehensible people. 2 guys, they own the business. We have to hire a lot of temp workers as needed, but most of them don't speak much English. These guys are always saying awful things to them, telling them that they are stupid and whatnot. One woman occasionally wears a shirt that says, "This is America, speak English or get out." My boss screamed at her, "Do you even know what your shirt says, dummy?" Then he laughed and walked away. Another guy here is Puerto Rican, and our boss told him, "Your mama is from the jungle." I had to physically restrain him from hitting the boss. Recently, one of them was talking about how they couldn't afford to give anyone a raise or a bonus, and then an hour later was telling me about the new boat and $3,000 navigation system he just bought. I work for inconsiderate jerks. As much as I hate to admit it, I used to get special treatment here until they met my girlfriend, who happens to be black. Now they treat me like a disappointment, like I've chosen the other side. Story 17. I worked as a maintenance man at a realty company. They had a policy where they didn't pay you for overtime. They let you bank your overtime hours toward time off with pay. The trouble was, there was so much work to be done every single day, they could never approve my days off because I was always behind. It was basically a 4-person job I was doing by myself. The property was huge. After working 12-hour days for weeks at a time, and then coming back at night and on weekends to deal with on-call emergencies, I finally looked up the labor laws in my city. Turns out anything more than 20 banked hours of overtime has to be paid out in cash. By law, I was up to 60. They still wouldn't give me the overtime pay. They just forced me to take the days off, and I just got further behind. Sure, it was nice to have a whole month of long weekends, but I also could have really used that cash. It would have been over $1,000 in overtime pay. I'm pretty sure they knew damn well this was the labor law in our city. How could they not? But they would have worked me like a slave forever if I hadn't looked it up on my own. And this from a company that made over $2 million a year just on the one property they owned, and they owned dozens. Story 18. I spent 11 years working for the university in Arizona. They are screwing America's poor and military, putting them in inescapable debt. The admissions people are horrible, trained to go after students' weaknesses and sign up students whether or not the students are even capable of doing the coursework. I only worked in the IT department, but I was part of the team that supported these activities, so I'm guilty too. I once visited a for-profit school because I was interested in taking a massage class or two, and my normal college doesn't offer them. I'm pretty good at giving massages. I had extra time and figured I'd learn a bit more, just like someone may take a pottery or art class. They started talking about masseuses making salaries of more than $70,000, and tried to get me to enroll in a 15-class program for $40,000 or more, the whole 9 yards. First, I've dated a massage therapist and know they make far less than $70,000. Second, they knew full well I wasn't interested in anything like that. I didn't call them back. A friend of mine went there. She was at an Ivy League college, got pregnant, and the dude pieced out hardcore, left the state and everything, and she had to drop out. A few years later, I decided to do it online. I rounded up all the reputable and respected online programs that have every credential possible: University of Maryland, Florida State, Oregon, Chicago, etc. She talked to each one, and they were going slow and perfect, with her making sure everything matched up with what she was expecting, mailing her stuff and whatnot. No pressure, just being informative and friendly because it was a big decision. She then talked to the university here in Arizona, and in less than 1 day managed to sign her up on the spot and drain her like no tomorrow over the course of a year. They've got some good snakes over there that just wait to strike whoever calls. Story 19. I work as a cook in a restaurant, part-time at $10 an hour. Needless to say, I'm broke and live paycheck to paycheck. A little less than a month before Christmas, I accidentally dropped the top of a blender at work and the handle snapped off. I immediately went and told my boss, the owner. He was not happy, but he didn't mention anything about me covering the cost. I figured since the owner of the restaurant is pretty well off, he would cover it, no big deal. Well, the next week he came up to me and told me my check was going to be a little short. I asked him why, and he told me that he is going to take 5 hours off my check every week until it's paid for. The blender costs around $200. My paycheck each week is about $220. So, pretty much, the money I was going to use to buy my girlfriend a Christmas present went to my rich boss for his expensive blender. I'm pretty sure it's illegal to make an employee pay for broken equipment if they didn't sign a contract agreeing to it beforehand. And it's most definitely illegal to take money out of someone's check without them knowing or agreeing. Story 20. I was a restaurant server for over 5 years and was S.A.D by customers at every company I worked for. None of these included Hooters at all, not implying this invites or excuses harassment. This was never taken seriously, including the time a man said he would be waiting for me in the parking lot after work, or the time a man told a story in graphic detail about visiting S-workers before mentioning that I looked like the type of girl who sleeps with professors at school. I have talked to a lot of women over the years about my experience, and everyone has similar experiences. Story 21. I worked for a catering company a few years ago, and we served the 50th college reunion of a school in Boston. It was a 3-course meal, and we thought we were done when we finally finished serving strawberry shortcake to each of the guests. The catering staff went on a break and started devouring the leftover food from the event after we got the all clear. Then someone comes in and reports to the manager that our extra VIP guest, the host of the reunion, was complaining that she had not been served dessert. So, our manager went into panic mode searching for shortcake, but it was too late. The employees ate them all. He stands in the middle of the kitchen and screams, "I don't care if you have to poop it out on a plate. Someone make me some freaking dessert." All the employees are frozen at this point, so the manager takes a dirty martini glass from the sink, fills it with whipped cream and garnishes it with a blueberry and a mint leaf. He rushes out of the room and serves the dessert he just made. Catering businesses are full of unethical antics. Story 22. One company I worked at displayed an insane amount of sexism and racism, especially in hiring. However, it's the kind of sexism and racism that most people would not consider to be bad. The powers that be decided that we needed to have an incredibly diverse team, and so this meant explicitly not hiring white males. They never told the candidates this, but internally it was discussed quite a bit. It was never phrased as an explicitly evil thing. "We won't hire this guy because of his race," for example, was never said explicitly. Still, many fuzzy phrases such as "we don't want to consider him because we're looking for a more diverse environment" were. Also, just to add to the horribleness, we had an incredibly diverse department already. The other terrible thing was one round of interviews where the bosses decided we were going to hire a woman but still interviewed men too. We turned down a whole bunch of great male candidates because they were male. The female candidates we got were horrible, as in they didn't know the basics of the job, but we were still seriously considering them because of their gender. I hate people who want diversity simply for the sake of diversity. If a company completely ignores good workers because of arbitrary aspects of their body or persona, then I certainly will feel no sympathy when their company begins to collapse. A company needs competent workers, and it's okay if every single worker of theirs turns out to be straight, white, and male. Obviously, hiring isn't that simple, and the world isn't perfect. Subtle, or perhaps not so subtle, racism, sexism, homophobia, basically every prejudice imaginable is present. So if all your workforce is the same, then that might signal hiring issues, but it can also signal the fact that governments and parents need to step up and show their kids it's okay to go into particular fields because they want to, even if it deviates from their gender norm. Of course, I could be wrong. Simply, diversity may trickle down to that person's family and friends, and they realize that they could go into that field too. However, I imagine those are extraordinarily small numbers. If someone can link a study, that would be awesome. Story 23. So, I was looking into a complaint one of my employees had about missing hours on a check. And sure enough, a 13-hour day was erased and changed to an 8-hour day. When I found the change was made by my boss, I asked the employee if they had spoken to my boss about the change, and they said no, and also mentioned they had a feeling this had been going on for a while. So I go to payroll and explain the situation. They pull a time card report and find it has been going on for a while, and not only to one employee but to over a dozen employees for many years. When I looked at the report that showed all the changes, there were mostly 3 to 5 minute changes, but they were all done to move a time punch inside a rounding window and prevent 15 minutes of overtime. There were 114 adjustments made to the employee complaining alone, who had only worked for the company for a year. The controller seemed very concerned and brought it to the CFO, who was going to meet with the CEO. Then all went quiet. The controller started avoiding me and kept conversations to hide by. A few months later, my employee was fired for a questionable reason without even letting me know till he was gone. The employee tried to sue, but his settlement attorney was no match for the legal team my work hired, and it was settled for pennies in mediation. My boss was never fired. I hate this place, knowing the amount it has stolen from employees. Been looking for another job ever since, but can't find the same money hours. Story 24. My last employer was one of those subprime auto lenders. We would put one, sometimes two, GPS tracking devices in vehicles. One is attached to the starter, and the other is hidden in the engine compartment for tracking only. If you don't pay your bill on time and avoid our calls, which will happen 15 times a day, we will disable the vehicle, keeping it from starting, whether you are in your driveway or at the grocery store. Imagine going shopping, coming out with $200 in groceries, and your auto lender is holding your car hostage till you pay up. If you think you are smart and take out the device that shuts the vehicle off, the device you don't know about will lead us right to your car, and it will be repossessed before the end of the day. Also, interest rates of 29.99 were standard. Story 25. So this isn't as evil as some of the stuff I've read in here, but for those that aren't familiar, there are laws concerning exempt and non-exempt status, meaning salaried versus hourly, so you get paid overtime. If you're salaried, you don't get overtime exempt, but it also means that if you miss an hour or two, you don't get your pay withheld. My company doesn't pay overtime, and everyone is salaried. However, if you miss an hour, they will take it off your paycheck. Additionally, if you work more than 40 hours in a week, say 16 hours on Wednesday, but only work 6 on Friday, they will withhold 2 hours of pay on Friday. I discussed this with them over a dispute on my last paycheck. They said it was company policy. I let them know that it is illegal, but I am not threatening them. It is actually very illegal, and has been in the news recently, as Obama has been pushing for enforcement on this issue. I am quitting this summer. I will be reporting them to the IRS and whoever else. Story 26. I worked for a Christian attorney who fear-mongered churches about losing their tax-exempt status and preyed on elderly congregations, saying that the government was going to come for them if they filed their tax or legal paperwork incorrectly. I took calls from them as they called in after hearing radio spots. They were all so scared for their churches and scared they would get in trouble. Elderly people who just wanted their churches to be okay and protected from the big bad IRS. They made money from workshops, $150 per person, not counting the workbooks, books teaching churches how to be in line with tax law, and subscriptions to their law office on retainer, in case the IRS comes after their churches. This guy had gold-plated buttons on his jeans. The floors in his office were made of marble, and he had fresh orchids delivered to his office every single day. Every time he updated his look, all the photos of him in the office had to be taken down and updated. His company just built an $8.5 million worship training center that has Bibles in the walls and the foundations. Inside the facility's lobby sits a finely appointed wooden table built in Italy. A stone floor features onyx imported from Israel and offers a millionaire wealth seminar. All the women in the office had to wear dresses at least ankle length and a bunch of other crap under the guise of religious respect. I lasted 3 days. I hope their offices burned down. Story 27. My company is really cool. I couldn't be happier. We're an insurance company, but we're ethical. It's neat. We actually refuse insurance to people who are too high risk. We don't try to sell to people who can't afford it. We don't even advertise. We spread through word of mouth, good deeds, and being selective of which agents are allowed to sell our policies. We also offer a pretty high commission on it. We treat our customers great and have their backs. It's really cool to see. Internally, it's really cool, too. We have an extremely low turnaround rate, and the company is good to all its employees. Even the mail clerks make more than I did when I started doing tech support. We hold fundraisers for charities, and we have community outreach programs to help families down on their luck. It's the first place I've ever worked where I felt like the company reflected my own values. So, that said, Here are some former employer stories. I used to work for one of the largest credit processors in the country. I'm a programmer, so my own job isn't necessarily reflective of the product the company sells, not some weird shift from credit processing to insurance agent. They are dirty, dirty people. I think I left out of that story that the coworker referred to as Wade was blackmailed into remaining after being given his notice. They did things like insist we misreport outages to customers like Visa, Discover, and Fifth Third or Blame Shift. Another one I worked for was a company that provided outsourced IT, other than providing subpar service in many areas. My main gripe with them was the way they treat their employees. They were dirty, slimy jerks. On multiple occasions, people would have their vacations canceled simply because the supervisor forgot to find coverage for them. In 2 cases, while I was there, of people I knew that resulted in the employees telling them to screw themselves and leaving. During the first week in February, Steve puts in a request to his supervisor to have a week off at the end of September. He has the PTO available, and this shouldn't be a problem. He's the first to request off for that time frame. He gets approval and moves on to plan the vacation. Fast forward to vacation time. Friday night, Steve and his family board their plane to Dublin. Steve gets a call at 12 a.m. Tuesday morning. His boss never bothered to find coverage, and now no one would be at the desk. Come the end of the second shift Monday, his boss demands that Steve get to the office by 10 p.m., or else. Steve is then fired for refusing to work when he says he's not cutting his vacation short. That happened multiple times. Screw them. Story 28. I worked for a liquor store a very long time ago, and the owner cheated both customers and the taxes. This was a poor side of town, and people would come in with handfuls of change, and he would help them count it. Guy was slick. He would rake in way more than the cost and give them back some, and then say, "This is yours. I don't want to take more than you owe." They would thank him for helping and think he was great. He kept an old push-button cash register and manually entered the tax amount. A great example was a 6-pack of cheap beer he had priced at $1.85. It would come to $2.50 after tax. The problem was that, at the time, the tax rate was only 7%. The tax should have been less than 14 cents, and he was collecting 65. He would also shortchange customers by giving them nickels instead of quarters. I quit when he told me I had to start shortchanging customers as well. He did many other things as well, so suffice it to say he was evil by preying on those who didn't have a lot to begin with. Story 29. I am an EMT. I used to work for a private EMS company. An employee had an asthma attack as she was about to clock in. She collapsed and lost consciousness. The medics who were at the station with her saw and started emergency care. They notified their dispatch of the situation, and that they would be en route to the nearest hospital shortly. The dispatching center said they could not transport her, and said to call 911 and leave her outside for them to get her. They then asked if they were en route to their non-emergent routine dialysis transfer. Another incident at the same company with an office employee at the headquarters. The girl started having substernal chest pain radiating down her left arm and shortness of breath, classic heart attack symptoms. Employees said to get a medic and get her in the unit to start treatment. The owner comes out of his office and says she can go anywhere near his ambulances, and to go outside and call 911. Turns out it was a heart attack. After both of these instances, the state EMS board was notified of these events by multiple employees. The state responded that they could not do anything, as the owner has the right to choose whom he will and will not treat, and that, as he was not state-owned, he had no duty to act. Ethically reprehensible? Yes. Illegal? No. That man is evil, and I denounce him and his company every chance I get. Story 30. The 2 major chain pharmacies in the U.S. force pharmacists to produce and verify prescriptions based on time limits. If I have to look up the dosage on your grandmother's heart medicine or counsel patients on important points, other orders will turn red, my pharmacy will lose points, and corporate bosses will visit to discuss workflow and penalize us. In the end, patient safety is tossed aside for the sake of corporate stockholders. What would you say if your physician had only 15 seconds to review your chart, or if he was penalized? I still don't know how this is legal. So I've been working in pharmacy for almost a decade now, and medication errors do happen because of constant pressure from corporate to meet metrics. One event in particular led to a 7-year-old with permanent organ damage. These events, of course, get swept under the rug. They don't even make local news. It makes me wonder how many similar events occur nationwide that the news never picks up on. I'm not sure that the fast food mentality to medicine is healthy, ethical, or sustainable. Having one farmed and one tech on a Saturday, where we do 400 scripts in a 9-hour period, is just asking for an error. Story 31. I worked for a ticket broker for a while. Ticket brokers basically buy tickets to events in hopes the event section will sell out and people will be forced to buy their marked up tickets. We were also part of a broker network. If one broker had tickets they were selling at $80, we would list them on our site at $100. If someone bought it from us, we would buy the tickets from the other broker and have them ship them to the customer. There were also these dummy websites in the network. They would make themselves look like the box office of a certain venue and list tickets available within a certain range at a 30% markup above face value. When someone placed an order from one of these sites, we would go to Ticketmaster, buy the tickets at face value, and then send them electronically to the customer. One time, when I worked by myself on a weekend, I straight up told the customer who hadn't bought anything from us yet that the tickets were still available from the box office and sent her a link to the correct website. It was one of the shadier things I've done as a liberal arts grad trying to get a job. Story 32. The attorney I worked for fired a young attorney through a text message. She was brand new and still learning, but he was throwing projects and cases at her without any sort of training and would make her cry almost every day. He was a jerk with a bad reputation across the state and practiced for 35 years with disciplinary actions and malpractice suits against him. But every young associate that worked for him left because they couldn't stand him. It was like working for Michael Scott, except it wasn't funny, it was infuriating. I couldn't take it anymore, so I left to work for the state, and I quit via text message by saying, "Thank you for the opportunity. I wish you the best in your future endeavors." Apparently while I was working there, so many other attorneys and judges kept their mouths shut and didn't say anything bad about the guy out of respect for me. But as soon as I quit, everyone came out of the woodwork to tell me about his bad reputation and that no one made money with him or stayed that long with him. Much happier now. Story 33. I worked security for a fairly large, high-tech firm. People used to sell chocolate bars and candy in the building as fundraisers for their kids or charities. This building was known for it. They even received an award from the city for donating so much to a large cancer society and hosting huge charity events. Well, the company got new vending machines. Turns out, in the contract with Coca-Cola, they were not allowed to have any other food items for sale in the building. As security, my job was to go around and confiscate the charity boxes and leave notes saying why they had been confiscated. Basically, I was told to take money away from schools, charities, and hospitals so that Coca-Cola could make more money. I refused to do it, and they not so subtly hinted at firing me. That is until my awesome coworkers and I spread word around the building of what was happening. Luckily, the building was full of amazing people who still had good morals. I'm not entirely sure what conspired in management, but we were not forced to remove any more boxes after that. Story 34. I used to work on collections for deceased people, calling their families and, depending on the state, telling them the debt was still owed, and they were now responsible for trying to convince them to resolve it. Sometimes we were calling people's spouses less than a week after the death, which sucked a lot. Community property states were the worst, because now this grieving spouse was responsible for debt that they may not have known about or money that their partner used to live it up while they could. It was mostly automotive debt. People who were given X amount of time to live went out and bought a car like a Corvette that they could never afford, died, had the car repossessed and sold for whatever they could get at an auction, and then went after the family's spouse for the rest. I needed the job and couldn't quit, but luckily my manager saw that it was really hard on me mentally and emotionally, and she switched me to a different project. Story 35. I worked in management for a call center in Egypt more than a decade ago. It was the first of its kind. The owner was a generally kind sleazebag, but in particular was crappy with pay. He was paying the prevailing rate of a standard Egyptian worker, 2,000 LE, that is $400 per month or less, yet he would short people all of the time. At one point, morale was so bad that I went about fixing it. I talked to people, gathered information, and worked with my trusted locals to come up with a completely fair merit-based pay and bonus system so that one could know what to expect on payday. I had a meeting, teleconference, as the owner was in NYC while we were in Cairo, with the GM, another American, and my direct boss, the owner, and the trusted locals, where I presented the plan, got consensus on details, put forth a timeline, and recorded the entire session. It was, by all accounts, a victory for the proletariat. When payday came around, I did the spreadsheet, had the numbers, and sent them off. The morning before payday, I got a call from the owner, who had me arbitrarily lower all of the numbers, decreasing pay for all people, negating the negotiated system. Story 36. I worked as a graphic designer for a tool manufacturing company a while back. They have since closed the location I worked at. The tools in question were made to be used in industrial conditions to drill and refine holes in metal. We had two grades of steel, high-speed and cobalt-reinforced. The cobalt-reinforced steel is used for jobs where the tool needs to hold up under extremely high duress, high speeds, or hard material. Each tool is etched with the material and size, length, and diameter. I overheard the plant manager talking on the phone to our inventory staff. Apparently, we were running low on the cobalt-reinforced steel in certain common diameters, and a shipment was not expected for at least a couple of weeks from the supplier. My jerk manager told them, very matter-of-factly, that they should just etch the high-speed steel tools to say they were cobalt-reinforced and ship them anyway, rather than delay the customer's orders. I hope to God that nobody was killed because of the catastrophic structural failure of tools that were not designed to do the job they needed them for. Story 37. I used to work for Philadelphia-based telecommunications service provider. They do a lot of crappy things to customers, but here are the shadiest things they did to employees. I worked for the loyalty retention department. Individually, I made the company tens of thousands of dollars a month. That was pretty standard among my teammates. As a result, we were well compensated in the form of commissions. One day, they rolled out a new commission strategy. They pump sunshine about how this is a much fairer system that will reward us more effectively. Every single person saw their commission shrink overnight. You simply couldn't make as much money with the new rules. It was a backdoor way to cut our pay. Rolled out a new negative reinforcement strategy for not meeting arbitrary and constantly shifting metrics. You would be severely reprimanded and/or fired for not meeting these numbers. It was applied selectively to get rid of people they heard discussing unionization or our work lives in general. Started regulating restroom time. If you left your desk for 5 minutes, a supervisor would come looking for you. If you exceeded 10 minutes of restroom use in a daily shift, you were called into a manager's office to explain. I went back to school, took online classes, and became a teacher instead. Much fewer shenanigans. Story 38. Many 911 operators for medical calls are forced to use a software program created by a vendor that forces the operator to ask a series of scripted questions. The company that sells this software to the agency has a set of criteria they expect the operators to follow. Unless the call is one of about 5, the call is not put into the system until all of the questions are answered. This means that when someone has called 911 and asks, "Are they on the way?" they are not until all of the questions are answered. This particular vendor advises operators to respond to this question, "Are they on the way?" with yes, yes, because we are on the phone, which to them is technically helpful. Only agencies that use this vendor's software program are subject to this criterion, and some agencies use the software that doesn't follow the criterion, meaning they do not hold the call as the vendor expects them to and do in fact have an ambulance responding. But many agencies do. Story 39. I work at a private ambulance company. No paid time off until you have worked there a full year. Then you only get 60 hours. They require photographic proof to approve bereavement leave, which maxes out at 20 hours. Made it somewhat difficult to attend my relative's funeral across the country. They make millions a year, yet we have the lowest pay of our competitors and drive squads with numerous mechanical issues. Management will always side against the employees during a dispute with a facility or patient's family, leading to an impressive turnover rate. Most employees last 8 months. Wages have been stagnant for almost a decade, with no benefits except for the cheapest health insurance plan possible. The typical premium for a family plan is $400 a pay. Thank God I don't have any kids. Rampant Medicare/Medicaid fraud. They hold paperwork and services regularly to make sure crews are writing run reports in a way that gets the company paid. If you call attention to trips that don't need to go by squad, which cost the patient hundreds of dollars, you will be let go soon enough. Constant criticism from supervisors about our use of drugs to treat patients because it costs money and makes work for them to restock and reorder. Same for equipment. Don't have a working pulse ox. Stop whining and run the trip. We didn't have them back in my day. Severe understaffing results in long transport delays and pushback from dispatch when asking for a lift assist for bariatric patients. Couldn't be happier to leave in May. Story 40. About 3 years ago, I worked for City Mortgage. My job was supposed to be helping people who were behind on their loans get a modification to lower their mortgage payments and catch up. I would work with individuals for weeks, gathering and submitting paperwork. One day, I received an ecstatic phone call from a lady I had been working with for weeks. She lined up a new job, making more money than she had ever earned. She was about 4 payments behind, but now she could make double payments until she was caught up. Unfortunately, Citi had determined that her home had increased in value, a rarity at the time, so it was no longer in their financial interest to help her avoid foreclosure. I had to tell her that the modifications, repayment plans, etc., that we had discussed were not an option. Either repay us in full this month, or we will begin the foreclosure process. I made the phone call and quit my job. Story 41. Instead of end-of-year bonuses, the president of our company handed out stacks of scratch-off tickets to each employee who attended the company party. Each bundle of tickets probably cost anywhere between $50 and $150 because they were composed of $10 or $20 cards. This is not horrible until you consider the ulterior motive. Our company had just launched a small advertising campaign for the state lottery, and it was being tested in a select few gas stations to see if it was an effective form of marketing. Guess where the tickets were purchased? To some of our employees, the $150 cash would have been a decent bonus, but our higher-ups decided it was more important to artificially inflate sales numbers to temporarily make us look like heroes. To add insult to injury, they bought a couple of those prank cards and mixed them in with the real ones, likely in the hopes that some fool would make a joke of themselves after thinking they won $25,000. Story 42. I briefly worked at a PR firm in DC, and I saw some crazy evil stuff. One of our clients was literally an Asian branch of Al-Qaeda. You know you are working in a strange world when your boss gives you a speech about what he tells himself to sleep at night. On top of that, they did tons of quasi-legal stuff, including editing Wikipedia for clients using a proxy IP and social media astroturfing, creating what appear to be grassroots movements. And they didn't just do this stuff to make their clients look more favorable. In many cases, they ran campaigns to discredit and diminish opponents of their clients. This job really gave me a perspective on the type of intense international scale of the soft power of the private sector in Washington. Perhaps the scariest thing is that because they are PR specialists, they are exceptionally good at covering their tracks. I know for a fact that this behavior isn't unique, it's just the way you do business. Story 43. I work for a large company that provides fiber optic internet services. We provide internet, SLH, DV, and phone. Anyone who knows the technical aspect of fiber optic internet knows that you need something called an ONT, optical network terminal, for the fiber line to direct the feed to the video, data, and phone ports, and also transfer video. And if your internet is set up for it, which it typically is, MoCA media over coax. The ONT requires light power, and so you have a power supply unit in your house, called a PSU/B. BU. The BBU stands for Battery Backup Unit. The point of the BBU is that it works as a UPS containing a rechargeable battery inside that keeps the phone line working for 6 hours or so in case of a power failure, so you can use the phone in emergencies. But if the battery is dying or dead, it beeps loudly every minute. It costs $50 for us to send you a new battery to replace. You don't actually need a battery in the unit. But taking the battery out doesn't stop the beeping. It continues to beep, switching to a battery not detected alarm. There is a button on it that says alarm silence, but that stops the beeping for 1 hour. Some techs are instructed to install these units in people's bedrooms or, in some cases, are forced to because they don't have garages or have inside ONT placements with apartments with a VDSL setup. It's so screwed up, and customers get so angry when they find out they have to pay to silence a stupid alarm. When my brother-in-law got into my company, the first thing I did was go over and take the BBU apart and clip the wires to the alarm speaker. Story 44. When I worked for an oil company, they owned 2 brands of gas stations, an in-house brand they could directly control, and a franchise that they would sell to the stereotypical foreigner, Indians, Pakistanis. Well, they would sell their franchise to eager new Americans looking for their own American dream and track to see how well that franchise site would do. Well, when the franchise's site would do well, they would open up their in-house brand literally across the street. Because the brand was in-house, their operating costs would be lower, and as a result, they would drop their prices accordingly. This drop was so severe in price, it would be about 10 to 20 cents. This caused the franchise guys to start turning a loss until they did whatever the main corporation wanted them to do in terms of business, and they would raise the prices back up when they were happy with the franchise. Eventually, the main company would capture all of the business from the franchise due to offering rewards programs, incentives, and prices the franchises couldn't do. I no longer work there because as a part of the brand management side, you would have to talk up the franchising opportunity to these people who were obviously hopeful and happy to be in America. Essentially, though, they were being scammed in the end, and I had seen it happen dozens of times. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.